Hello, you're watching James. My name's James, you're watching me, and I'm talking about watches. Well, one of the watches on my list this year to buy was the Seiko DressKx. I wanted to buy this watch for a number of different reasons, but one of those reasons was to compare it against my SKX 009. Now, these two watches are very different. Yes, they have some similarities, but they also have lots of differences. And I really wanted to make a video to sort of show you those similarities and those differences. I wanted to show why it has been nicknamed the DressKx. I want to show whether that is actually a justified name. Does it have actually enough similarities to the SKX to be justified to be called the DressKx? Now, before we jump into this side-by-side comparison, if you haven't done so already, I'd really appreciate it if you tap on that subscribe button. And if you want to hit the like button as well and throw in a quick comment, that'd be fantastic. But let's flip the camera now and let's check out these two watches side by side. I think today's side-by-side video is probably going to be the most interesting side-by-side that I've done, because these two watches have so many similarities, but then so many differences, because they do really sort of have that sort of same style, same features, same looks, but they are two very, very different watches. But it's one of the reasons I actually bought the DressKx is because I wanted to compare it against my SKX. Being a DressKx, being given that nickname, obviously it is reflecting this watch here. So let's run through some of the similarities and some of the differences. And obviously the biggest differences between the two is the size of them. And I have to admit, when I did buy the DressKx, I was a little bit surprised about how small it was compared to this one here, because I don't think the actual numbers on a page listing the dimensions really show how physically different in size it is. So the DressKx has a case dimension of 40 millimeters. The SKX is 42.2 millimeters. The width of the DressKx is 11.8 millimeters, whereas the SKX is 13.3 millimeters. The lug-to-lug difference, well, the DressKx is 44.2 versus 46 millimeters on the SKX. Now, those dimensions don't actually sound hugely different, but in hand, it really does feel different. Also, the lug width on the DressKx is 20 versus 22 millimeters on the SKX. We have very different movements inside these watches as well. In the DressKx, we have the 4R36 movement, which has hacking and hand winding. This movement was introduced into the Seiko lineup in 2011. And obviously in the older discontinued watch, we have an older movement, a 7S26 movement, which was introduced in 1996, which does not have hacking, it does not have hand winding. Obviously, that's a big difference. We can wind this one up, whereas this one we are doing the bit of the shuffle to try and get this thing moving. That is a big difference, and it is a difference when you're actually owning and wearing this watch as well. This one I do like to wear a lot. It's a lovely watch to wear, but wow, it stops on me so many times. Because I'm not wearing it every single day, I'm constantly having to get it energized again by giving it a shuffle. Whereas the DressKx, I can just put a little bit more power into it, give it a quick wind, and she keeps ticking away at the correct time. Now, talking about that, we have a push-pull crown only versus a screw-down crown. And now that leads really into sort of the water resistance differences between these two, because obviously we have a proper ISO certified diver's watch versus a sort of a desk diver. We have 100 meters water resistance with this one, and it achieves that with a seal in the push-pull crown and a screw-down case back. Now, the SKX, obviously being a proper diver, has 200 meters of water resistance, therefore having a screw-down crown and a screw-down case back. And what stands out as difference between these two? Well, obviously the bezels are very, very different. I don't think I need to point that out too much, but we have a solid stainless steel bezel on the DressKx, and we have a 120 click unidirectional rotating bezel, diver's bezel on the SKX. The cases themselves are a very similar shape, and I think that's really what is pulling these together as a similar sort of watches, as well as what's on the dial, but we'll talk about that in a minute. When we actually look at the case design, the case shape, the location of those crowns at that 4 o'clock, the way that they are both semi-guarded, they certainly have that same sort of look. They also have similar circular brushing on the top. There is also a chamfered edge on the SKX. Now, there isn't a chamfered edge on the DressKx, but it does have this little lip, this little feature here, which sort of does reflect a similar sort of edge, which does transition then both of these watches into a polished side and is that nice rounded side. And it is a similar feature of this that they both wear very nicely and they're both very comfortable on wrist. And the casebacks are obviously very different. DressKx has a see-through caseback versus the solid caseback on the SKX. Now, I'm not going to compare the two bracelets. This is the original bracelet on the DressKx, whereas this is an aftermarket strap code bracelet. This one originally came on a rubber strap, but when it did come on its original bracelet, it was one of those sort of Jubilee style. And it's quite different to this one. Now let's talk dials, because here's another very big similarity between them. Let's just look at those two watches. Firstly, the Rehort trapdoor ring that runs around the outside of both of them, very similar with those markers at the minute hands and that extra little slightly thicker marker at the hour hands. The indices certainly look the same as well. We have the triangle at the 12 o'clock for both of them with that little extra bit of a line. We also then have those two markers at the 6 and the 9 o'clock that look the same, and circles at the rest of the hours. Differences obviously are this is applied, all those indices are applied, has a applied loom on the top of a polished stainless steel, versus we just have circles printed on with a loom applied as well. The hands certainly look very similar as well. Both polished stainless steel and loom filled, both have arrow hands on the minutes, both have those slightly little sword style hands on the hour with a little syringe tip, and both of the second hands are long and slender with a counterbalance lollipop, which is loom filled. So speaking of loom, let's have a look at the loom on these two watches. As you can see, they are actually both very good. They're both very strong. And as we speed it up, they both consistently last for a long time. I'm actually quite impressed by the Seiko 5. It is actually holding up quite well against a diver's watch. However, of course, the SKX is now getting a little bit older. Loom does deteriorate over age, but it's still not that old that it's going to really affect the difference in the loom. And the text on the dial is obviously different as well. We have an applied Seiko logo, but then a printed Seiko 5 logo with automatic, whereas the SKX is all printed Seiko automatic and then divers 200 meters in a different color, sort of matching in well with that sort of Pepsi dial. And both watches actually fit very nicely on wrist. Both have that same sort of wearer's experience. Obviously the SKX is bigger, it feels bigger, it looks bigger, and especially on a strap code bracelet, it weighs a lot more. But the DressKx, it sort of has that same sort of comfort feel. It really is this case shape, I think, that really works so well with both this watch and the SKX. It's very, very comfortable on wrist. The way that it is curved around on that case, that is same on the DressKx. Lovely clean, lovely looking, and lovely feeling on wrist. So they do have a similar sort of wrist presence, even though they are different sizes and different weights. So I have to say it's a very interesting and confusing comparison, this one, because they are so similar in so many ways, but yet they are so different in so many ways as well. They are very different watches. We have a very tool diving watch, whereas we have a bit of a classy, elegant dress watch. But they look very similar and they wear very similar. It's a really interesting comparison, and that's why I was really quite interested to put these two watches side by side. All right, let's flip back to me now, and I'll give you some of my final thoughts on these two watches and the side-by-side comparison. So as you can see, there is actually more differences between these watches than similarities. However, I really do like and I really do appreciate whoever did nickname this the DressKx, because it really does sum up what this watch is. And when you do put it side by side with the SKX, I think it really does emphasize why this name is so good for it. It does have those SKX sort of looks, but it is a dressy sort of classy watch. It's a DressKx. Alright guys, thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. Please feel free to check out some of my other videos, and I hope to see you in the next one.